So I'll make this as a statement, not against Oklahoma or Brent Venables. Has nothing to do. It's just the business of college football. It's all about college football. So we've got Brent Venables here in the last couple of days signing a 6-year contract extension, $51.6 million. That's $8.5 million per season. So the deal, Parker, would be that he's into a 6-year contract. Let's say, Sooner fans, forgive me, 8-4, 7-5, and let's say the third year he's on a hot seat, he loses his job. They've got a big buyout on their hands. If he succeeds, they're probably tearing this thing up in 2 or 3 years anyway, and jacking him up with Kirby Smart at $13 million. That pay scale is obviously on the inflation scale, just like everything else. So again, this is not a statement against Oklahoma or Brent Venables. It's more about just the way business is done in college football. You got to retain your coach. You got to show that he's going to be there for a while. But is there anything nuanced to this that is different to the OU Venables equation of why it was done now?
Well, as I do with many things that happen at Oklahoma and across the rest of the college football world, Mark, I want to try to look at this through the lens of recruiting, because I think it's pretty well known around these parts, and you don't even necessarily have to be in the Oklahoma camp to understand that Brent Venables is committed to being at Oklahoma for the long haul. He wants, I think ideally, and he hasn't said this, but in so many words, he has hinted at the fact that he would like this to be his only head coaching job. And he would like to coach Oklahoma well into not only the SEC transition, but beyond. And so Brent Venables wants to be here. Oklahoma wants him here in Norman, Oklahoma. And so there's a commitment on both sides. And it's important to clarify. It's not a 6-year extension. It's a 2-year extension of his previous contract. So that takes it 6 more years from where we sit today through the 2029 season. But previously his contract ran through 2027. Now it runs through 2029. So $400,000 raise. So you can basically chalk that up. That's an inflation raise. But as I see it, and as I look at it through the lens of recruiting, this is an extra measure of stability that I think is afforded to recruits and their parents and their extended families. Whenever they come to Oklahoma, they have the assurance that Brent Venables is going to be at Oklahoma for the entirety of their tenure there. And that's an important thing to be able to sell to recruits, is if you're Brent Venables and you have a kid walking in your office, let's say this past weekend, they had their big recruiting weekend, right? And there are going to be players, and they're especially parents, that ask about your contract situation, your level of satisfaction. Hey, if we commit to the University of Oklahoma, can we count on the fact that you're going to be here to see my son's collegiate career through, and that you're going to be there to coach him every step of the way? And if your contract only runs through 2027, well, you can't make that promise. If your contract runs through 2029, you can. And so I think this is a reflection. I think what this shows, what this reflects on both ends, is that Brent Venables is committed to be at Oklahoma in the long haul. Oklahoma is committed to everything that Brent Venables has cultivated foundationally, culturally. They believe they have the right formula heading into the SEC. And they don't want there to be any question in the minds of recruits who travel to Norman and consider the University of Oklahoma as an option for their matriculation. They don't want there to be any question in those kids' minds that if they come to Oklahoma, they're not going to have to worry about getting caught up in the coaching carousel, which is something, we see it every offseason, Mark. There are major coaching moves. There are assistants that take bigger jobs. There are head coaches that uproot their entire staff and take them with them to other places. See Jed Fish at Washington, for instance. And so I think what this reflects is that everybody at the administrative level and in the Switzer Center at the University of Oklahoma believes that this is going to work. There's a blueprint here. We have our guy. Our guy doesn't want to go anywhere. And we don't want anybody that walks in here to have any misconceptions about what the future of Oklahoma football looks like if they want to be a part of it.
All good points. 2 assistants, DeMarco Murray and Miguel Chavis, also given contract extensions. Were they just due, or is that a reward for a job well done?
It's a little bit of both. I think obviously, you look at the work that this Oklahoma staff is doing right now, on the whole, whether it's recruiting or whether it's development. Everybody deserves a pat on the back for a job well done. I don't think there's any assistant coach on Oklahoma's staff that hasn't pulled their weight through 2 years of the Venables era. And granted, it hasn't been a smashing success yet. 6-7 in year one, 10-3 in year two, but it was never going to be an overnight fix at Oklahoma with the hand that Lincoln Riley left for Brent Venables on his way out the door. And so I think there is an acknowledgement, and this kind of goes back to the Venables contract, right? This thing is headed in the right direction. It's not there are no microwave solutions in college football. There are certainly instances where a coach like Sonny Dykes, right, has an amazing year out of nowhere. First year at TCU, they go play for the national championship, and then what happens? The crash and burn comes the following year. So it's very, very difficult to have microwave success in college football. What you have to do is you have to lay the foundation. You have to reshape the culture. You have to establish your vision. And then you have to really from there just build and build and build and build towards a program, and not just a team. Because you think about it, a team is 1 year. A program is broader than just one season. If you want to build a championship program and not just a championship team, you got to take steps along the way. You can't take one giant step. You got to take a bunch of small steps. And so what I perceive at Oklahoma is that all of these assistants are satisfied where they're at as of right now. And who knows, maybe a big time coordinator gig or even a head coaching gig comes up for one of them this offseason. You can never rule that out these days. But there's a lot of camaraderie within that building and a lot of belief that, hey, if we stick together, if we band together, as long as we're in it, not necessarily for a decade, but if we're in it together for several years at Oklahoma, we have the opportunity to build something and be part of something that's really cool and really unique across the landscape of college football, because rare are the staffs these days, especially at this level, Mark, that can stick together for that long.
Absolutely. Nomadic industry, no doubt. It always has been, and even more so now than it's ever been. You mentioned assistant coaches and their goals and their aspirations. Seth Luttrell has been a head coach. He's an offensive coordinator now, of course, taking over for Jeff Lebby. Real indications of a different philosophy approach, or is he going to not mess with a good thing?
There's going to be some interesting, I would say, nuance to Seth Luttrell's offense that you haven't yet seen from Oklahoma throughout the Riley era, throughout the Lebby era. As those two are obviously the previous offensive masterminds for the Sooners. And from everything I've heard from sources within the building, there are going to be structural similarities to what Lebby does. And pretty much any offensive coordinator these days that's running a pretty modern scheme, you're going to have basic tenets that carry over from playbook to playbook. And so I think there will be some natural similarities, but I think there are also, beyond that, some additional similarities in the way that Luttrell and Lebby kind of visualize their offense, visualize success, and lay the groundwork thereof. But you will see some things from Luttrell that you did not see from Lebby, and you will not see some things from Luttrell that you did see from Lebby. And I don't know. I would like if I had to put a number on it, I would say there's going to be a 60-70% resemblance to what Oklahoma fans have been accustomed to the last couple of years in terms of the offensive scheme. But there will be a lot of novelties. There will be things that you see on a Saturday now with Seth Luttrell calling the shots that are new and that you haven't seen before. I think one thing that Oklahoma fans would like to see is a bit of a slower pace offensively, and I think that can be expected. Lebby was a hurry-up guy. They were going to get down the field as fast as possible, press the defense, force the issue. Don't know that we're going to see exactly that same mentality with Luttrell at the controls. I think they'll still go fast. I think there will still be an element of tempo, but I also think you'll see them huddle more than we've been accustomed to.
Parker Thune, OU Insider on Rivals, KREF Sports, Monday through Friday, noon to 3 Central Time. I'm combining a question in the chat about the center position in particular with what I'm reading here in Athlon from an opposing SEC assistant coach who is highly questioning the offensive line's preparedness for the SEC. So the center position in particular, if you've got a beat on that, and then also just general offensive line uncertainty heading into a better league.
I think it's fair to have some concerns about where Oklahoma's offensive line is at heading into the SEC. I think that's natural. I think that's perfectly fair. The Sooners lose all 5 starters up front. Anytime you lose all 5 starters, it's going to be a bit of a mystery box, if you will, as to what you get the following year. And the Sooners did a good job in the transfer portal of bringing in some experienced contributors, guys that are plug-and-play starters. Fabechi Wiwu from North Texas, Garen Hatchett from Washington. Most recently, Branson Hickman from SMU, who's going to be the program's starting center this fall. So the pieces are there. The talent is there. The question is, and it's always a question with the offensive line, regardless of how many starters you're replacing, how well will they mesh as a unit? Because you can have 5 high-level football players up front, but if they aren't working in coordination with one another, you're going to have problems. And that's where Bill Bedenbaugh's expertise and his penchant as a coach comes into play. I think, and it's becoming a more common sentiment around here in Oklahoma, Mark. I think the Oklahoma offensive line is actually going to be surprisingly strong relative to the national expectation, because I do think there's that perception that Oklahoma might not get outright bulldozed, but that they'll have issues up front. What I see, and I was talking to somebody this past weekend, a good source on the matter, who said, look, here's what'll probably happen. It'll take them 3 weeks, which you look at their non-conference slate, it's Temple, it's Houston, and it's Tulane. 3 games that Oklahoma should win. So it'll take them 3 weeks. They'll have some things to work through. They'll have some kinks to work out. But once they do, they're going to be completely solid.
I saw a Pro Football Focus grade on Hickman that was really solid, considers him a high-level player. Our buddy Jackson stopping by. Jackson, thank you so much for the contribution. He would like to know your thoughts on Oklahoma and LSU playing on rivalry week. Of course, that's been bedlam for the most part for Oklahoma through the generations, but LSU on that final weekend of the season.
I love it, man. I think I'm hoping that's a night game in Death Valley, because night games in Death Valley are just the coolest, right? But there's a good deal of beef between the OU fan base and the LSU fan base, and it dates back to the 2003 Sugar Bowl. There was, you know what, I'm not gonna. I've heard a lot of firsthand accounts. I'm not going to relay those firsthand accounts. I'll leave that to the folks that actually lived it. I was quite young at the time, but suffice to say, I've heard many an account over the years from Oklahoma fans that walked away from that experience with less than stellar perceptions of the LSU fan base. And so they haven't played each other since. So it's been, 21 years now? I don't know how many Sooner fans, I don't know what percentage of the Sooner fans are kind of from the new generation like myself that won't have a firsthand recollection or an experience at that game. But there's a good deal of clean SEC hate there. And so I think that's it's not a rivalry by any means, certainly not yet. It might be at some point down the line in the new SEC, but I think there's enough vitriol between those two fan bases that I think it's going to be an interesting addition to that rivalry week slate.
Yeah, a lot of options the SEC could have gone with in regards to trying to match up certain teams that have connections but aren't necessarily rivals on that final weekend, because that's what has been the approach. I don't know what the Big 12 is doing. They're all over the place. They have not tried to establish rivalries in their scheduling for the final weekend, but that's at this point, of course, no concern to Oklahoma fans.